24. I'll speak into the microphone. Mr. Grummer, do we have any announcements from staff?
Yes, sir, Commissioner. So there will be a virtual meeting, Virtual Planning 101 for elected and appointed planning officials that would count towards a certified Arkansas planning official CARPO certification, and will be held virtually online October 6th, 7th, and 8th. Information was emailed out to commissioners, and this training is highly recommended. That's all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Grummer. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. You've all been provided copies of the minutes. Does anybody have any corrections to be made to the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, yes? Yes. Those opposed, no. All right, minutes are approved. We have no public comments on non-agenda items, so I will now open the public hearing. We will start with old business. Item number 1, let's see, this is regarding the site and landscape plan for the Maumelle splash pad. Mr. Grummer, staff comments.
Mr. Commissioner, this item was on the August agenda, but was deferred until City Council approved the conditional use for the splash pad on open space. City Council approved the conditional use on September 8th, so this item was added back on old business. A motion is not needed to bring this back as the item was deferred, since no motion was made for action on the item at the last Planning Commission meeting. Previous concerns on the site plan with this concern parking. After that meeting, City Hall was evaluated, and it was found that 86 parking spaces exist at City Hall, of which 51 are needed to meet City Hall and court's parking requirement, leaving 35 additional spaces for meeting various court and parking amenity parking needs. A revised analysis by Crafton and Toll places the needed parking spaces for the splash pad at 18 spaces. So the City Hall parking, in addition to the non-binding agreement from Maumelle Charter School for shared parking to accommodate up to 31 additional spaces, satisfied staff requirements. Other concerns were with discharge into Lake Valencia, but this is part of the building permit process, which an application has to be submitted to the State of Arkansas Health Department concerning the plumbing design as well as any discharge. So no certificate of occupancy will be issued until all plans are approved there. The last one was dealing with detention requirements. The pad will be depressed to the middle by 8 inches, allowing it to serve as its own detention, which satisfies the city engineer on detention. Staff recommends approval contingent upon satisfying any additional commissioner requirements.
All right, thank you, Mr. Grummer. Any commissioner questions or comments to staff? Any other commissioner comments or questions? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
Make a motion we approve the site and landscape plan for Maumelle splash pad, contingent on staff comments.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Those opposed, no. All right, motion carries. Moving on to item number 2 of old business relating to the drainage and irrigation plan for the Maumelle splash pad. Mr. Grummer, staff comments.
Staff requirements have been met on the irrigation and drainage plan, so staff recommends approval contingent upon satisfying any additional commissioner requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Grummer. Any questions or comments from the commission? Does anyone have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the drainage and irrigation plan for the Maumelle splash pad, contingent on satisfying staff comments.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
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 Those opposed, no. All right, motion carries. Move on to new business. Item number 1, a proposed motion for a due pass recommendation to the city council regarding amending section 54-102 of the Maumelle Master Street Plan map regarding Maumelle Valley Drive. Mr. Grummer.
So, Mr. Commissioner, you'll probably remember last month, White Daters and Associates, as the applicant, submitted an application for a variance of street grade on the proposed section of Maumelle Valley Drive, which is to be constructed as part of Phase 19 of Maumelle Valley Estates. I will remind the Commissioners, this section of road has not been constructed yet, but has previously been approved on a preliminary plat that came out in 2000. This section of street is intended to connect the Maumelle Valley Estates to Osage Falls. Last month, the Commission approved variance for a 2% additional grade on this street because they had issues with the steepness of the ridge going down, which allowed a collector, which maximum is 12%, to be bumped up to 14% grade. The applicant returned this month after that approval with a preliminary plat and proposal that does not conform to the master street plan. They were unable to get the street grade to 14%. It remained above that. So after review and discussions with with city engineer, the staff is recommending that an amendment to section 54-102 of the Maumelle Master Street Plan to downgrade this section of proposed road from a collector to a local residential designation in order to raise the maximum grade allowed to 15%. And so staff recommends approval, due pass recommendation to City Council for downgrade to this specific section.
All right, thank you, Mr. Grummer. Do you have any questions or comments from the Commission?
Yeah, I have a question to staff. If we downgrade this to a residential, the speed limit requirements change, is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
It drops to a 25?
Yes, sir. Also, also in addition to the speed limit, the collector width is 31 feet. A residential width is 27 feet. So a residential road is narrower, which slows traffic down. And the maximum grade allowed is 15%.
I got one more. Is there someone from the fire department here that we can talk about this?
So, I still have a big issue with this. Those of you that were in the subcommittee meeting about a week ago saw the pictures that I had up there of our apparatus on a 12% incline. If we go to 15%, I'm still a no on this. If you guys decide to go ahead and push this through, I would at least hope that you guys would make a recommendation that, you know, I talked about that a little bit at the subcommittee meeting before the proposal was brought forward that we could accept, but again, here we are, we've changed it again. But if you decide to pass this, I would hope that you would at least think about making a recommendation that they sprinkle, put a residential sprinkler system in those residences on that incline there. But I'm not going to stand in front of you and tell you I'm for this. I mean, yes, we have streets that are at that or taller. I mean, we've got higher than that, but I can't change the past. All I can do is look to protect the citizens that are here now that I'm here. And I'm not comfortable. The Arkansas Fire Code, we adopted that. We didn't adopt any of the annexes, but Annex D talks about 10% being max. And now we're talking about 1.5 times that at 15%. Anybody have any questions?
Any further questions or comments, Chief Ezell?
That's all I got. Thank you, Chief.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to
Fisher?
go on record as stating that I oppose this also. My opposition to it is that on the south end, you got a collector street, on the north end, you got a collector street. And we're changing a section in there only to allow the developer to put in more houses. I got a problem with that. So my vote will be no.
Mr. Grumble?
Yes, sir.
Our current code, as far as I know, it permits the 15% in all residential application. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
R1, R2, doesn't matter in that residential class?
The ordinance allows for up to a 15% grade in a residential maximum, and you can take that grade it does not have a distance restriction on it. The distance restriction, which we talked about last month, of 200 feet, dealt with exceeding the maximum, which you would require a variance for. But at 15%, you could exceed 200 feet as long as you needed to. And in, I guess, clarification to the residential as well, there is a stop sign at the intersection of Manitou and Maumelle Valley Estates, which breaks up the loop per se that Maumelle Valley Estates was creating. And I did drive actually today. I went out and I timed myself driving from the intersection of Manitou and Odom to the intersection of Manitou and Maumelle Valley Drive. And then I went up and drove myself from Odom to the end of Maumelle Valley Drive on the north side. On the Manitou loop, it took me 1 minute and 20 seconds to get to that intersection. On Odom going Maumelle Valley Drive, it took me 1 minute and 13 seconds. So the distance is about the same from the entry points off of Odom on those. So if you add on the additional time and the stop signs and the navigating the hill, when we discussed it internal to the city, we saw this street being utilized more for or acting more like a residential street and not a collector street. Most collector streets are going to receive more traffic from the surrounding residential areas, but this is at the very end of both subdivisions on the back end, so we see it as acting more like residential.
Sorry for not asking permission, Mr. Chair. Can I ask the chief a few more questions?
Absolutely, Commissioner Johnson.
Chief, sorry.
Chief, if you may.
Thank you for attending tonight, Chief Azil.
You're welcome.
It's a tough spot here. I hear your concerns. I understand the limitations of the apparatus, and you were very kind to be able to show us that. I think the decision here, I guess from a staff perspective, is that I don't know if we're going to join these streets. I'm not the designer, the engineer of record for this project, but it looks like it's going to be very difficult, if not impractical or impossible. Everything is can be achieved, but if we're going to join these streets, it looks very difficult to be able to do that at even 12%, and I know that you prefer 10. This section, I don't believe that we can join from an engineering perspective, and Mr. Dale can speak for the applicant, but I think it's going to be very difficult to achieve your preference. So I think the choice is that do you prefer, to have the streets joined and provide that from a safety measure, and of course we can take in or consider the recommendations to be sprinkled or not, because I don't believe that we can meet a 12% grade and connect these streets. In fact, I'm pretty confident that that's going to be the case. So I would love to be able to give you your desire, but if we want to connect these two subdivisions together to perhaps increase response time, and it may not be that much, I'm not for sure, we would have to give I guess, some grace regarding the application of the street grade, or we won't be able to connect them.
Right.
So when you say take an opposition with that, that would mean that it's not connected. Because I don't think that they can meet your, so if it goes forward from here, it goes to city council, because if he was able to do it at a 12% grade, he knows what the requirements of the city of Mall Mill are. He wouldn't be before us. He would already had it designed at 12%, and he would have went on. But he wasn't able to do that. So he's here before us as a result of that. So your position would mean that the street would not be, more than likely would not be connected.
That's correct. If that's the best we can do, yes.
So your preference is to, from a response time perspective, is to not have the streets connected.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Was that it, or did,
Anything further for the chief?
okay, thank you.
And I note that we do have a representative for the developer present, if anyone has any questions for Mr. Dale. Any other questions or comments? I will entertain a motion.
So let me ask you, if I may, so I understand this. So we have a master street plan amendment before us for this. So if this moves through and fails, then we would need to amend the master street plan to not ever connect these two subdivisions.
Unless somebody can bring another way, I wouldn't amend it until somebody comes with a proposal on how, either showing that. So in the next, if they revise the preliminary plat and show the cul-de-sac type or show it not connecting, then at that point, I would probably make the recommendation to modify. But until I'll leave that up to further discussion afterwards. But
This has always been shown as connected since 2001.
well, it always has, and both developments, both subdivisions were designed, and the intent of the long-term plan was to connect the two. And that's the direction that the city has always taken with these subdivisions, is for the connection. And of course, I believe the police made the comments that they would prefer to have the connection for faster response time. I would assume that the police may utilize that more so than what the fire department would. But from a planning perspective, it makes more sense to connect the roads together.
I concur with that. Is the requirement for sprinkle, where would that fit in to the process?
So by ordinance, we don't have anything that would require the houses to be sprinkled. By ordinance, if they meet the 15% grade, which the revision that was provided in the Planning Commission packet, it was revised from the subcommittee, and if you recall, White Daters had provided a possible solution to get the 16% less than 200 feet and make it work. But after going back, if I recall, they could not, the numbers just didn't work right. So they came back with this revision, and this revision actually got the grade to 15% and below all the way up, which actually meets the intent of the ordinance. So by doing that, they can build the road without any concrete, which we had discussed before as well. And they can do so by ordinance, and there's no other requirements that would be placed on them from our ordinance standpoint when it comes to sprinkling.
Maybe I need to restate the question differently. Can we require them to sprinkle the houses at this stage? That's why I said, where does that, if the chief wants these, I don't know how many lots we got here, dozen or so lots sprinkled.
To my knowledge, the city cannot require them to do something that is not a mandated requirement of some sort. So no, the city cannot force that upon them. Although the recommendation can be made and they can choose whether or not to accept that recommendation, but I'm not too sure if the developers are here and wish to tie themselves to that.
I was just trying to make clarification if we had the authorization to require that, and you're saying no.
I believe you have the authorization for recommendation, but not to require it, no, sir.
Well, as a comment, I will state that, I can't speak for the entire commission, but I will personally make a recommendation to the developer that these houses do be sprinkled to put the fire department at ease.
And
I would like to see the street be connected. I think from a safety perspective, it's better. You know, it's a shame we don't have an apparatus to be able to serve that safely currently in the fleet. And I know that there's 10% and 12% for code's perspective. We already have 15% in other areas. I'd rather for us to see us put a condition on it and join the two and be able to satisfy the safety need. And if that's, you know, that burden's going to be passed along to the people that buy the lot.
so in clarification to the sprinkling as well as the serving it by fire, and in conversations with Chief Azell, and he can correct me on this if I'm wrong, the fire trucks can navigate the street, and they can actually hook up to hydrants and utilize their fire equipment. They just cannot use the ladder apparatus because that requires stabilizing of the vehicle, and that's where the stress comes from.
So in the motion, make sure we don't screw this up. Is in the motion, if we move forward with it, I think Chief's okay, which we would require anything greater than 12%, Chief? We got 12% coming up here, okay? So anything greater than 12%, we would make that recommendation to be able to move forward with the connection, should the city council deem it appropriate.
So right now, just remember, we're making a motion on the master street plan amendment, which really does not do with grade. That just deals with the amendment to the master street plan. The next item dealing with possible variance, if you choose to approve the amendment to the master street plan to downgrade this to residential, then you have the option to discuss any additional variance of grade. But as far as this amendment, we're not dealing with grade.
To piggyback off of Mr. Grammer's comments there, I think it would be appropriate, given the variance that we have already approved and the grade implications by going from collector to residential. You know, grade is going to be involved here, so to your question, Commissioner Johnson, I think it would be appropriate to include in our recommendation to the city council, including whatever comments the person making the motion deems appropriate.
Okay.
As a qualified recommendation, if you will.
Well, that's just a recommendation. I've tried to weave through that. Seems to be able to make everybody somewhat happy or not happy, I'm not for sure. So I'd make a motion that we propose a do pass recommendation to city council for Maumelle Valley 19 here for this connection as submitted, with a recommendation with the do pass that there is consideration given to providing sprinkling among these residences for a grade greater than 12%.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no.
No.
All right. Vote of 6 to 1, the motion passes, and we will issue a qualified do pass recommendation. Moving on to item number 2. Scratch that. I will now temporarily close the Planning Commission and convene the meeting of the Board of Zoning Adjustment. We'll move to item number 2. A proposed motion to approve a variance for an extra 1% street grade above the maximum for also Maumelle Valley Drive. Mr. Grammer.
So this variance was kind of a piggyback off of the, if you approve the amendment to the master street plan, recommending the downgrade, then in previous conversations, the fire department had agreed to certain grades up to 16%, but not to exceed that. 17% was too much. So where you can approve up to 2% grade, staff is recommending just 1%, so that if any additional, whenever they get to the actual design of the street and drainage, that they're kept within no more than 16. But this is at the option of the applicant.
Mr. Chair, and I've had a discussion, I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. So if the city council does not move forward with the item 1 with the 1%, that would permit them to go to 15% or 13%? if it remains a collector.
Yeah, my understanding is that this variance would be 1% above what is allowed for the classification of streets. So if it remains a collector, they would get an additional 1% to go from 12 to 13. If it goes to residential, they will get an extra 1% to go from 15 to 16.
Well, so,
Or is that not correct, Mr.
Yeah, I
Drummond?
wanna make
well, so the intent was, last month, you approved a variance for 2% grade. And, so that's passed. So they can go with a collector right now, up to 14%. Now that, you're making the recommendation to downgrade to residential, they can go up to 15% now. But the city attorney, actually requested this variance for clarification purposes, because last month, that variance, the street was a collector. And if this goes through as a residential, the city attorney would prefer complete transparency to say, if it goes residential, then we're only recommending 1%. That way and it would completely supersede any previous variance. So the recommendation I'm sorry, and I may have worded that incorrectly on here. Yeah, so on the title, it says specific section of proposed Maumelle Drive, which motion revokes any previous variance granted for this specific section of road. So in other words, if it goes residential, you would only be approving a 1% grade increase with this, if they choose to go forward with it. If the residential doesn't pass through city council, then more than likely, they're gonna wanna stay with the 2%, and that's really up to them. That way because if it stays collector, they would rather have as much grade to work with as possible, and that's gonna be 14, not 13. So this is kind of a conditional variance based upon what they would like to do. But it's for residential, not collector. So you may want to word the motion for that specifically.
Brian Dale with White Daters and Associates. If I can interrupt for just a sec, I think on behalf of the applicant, we'd like to withdraw this application. As we're sitting here stating, we'd rather have the 12 plus 2 or the 15. We don't need a 16, so we'd like to withdraw this request if possible.
It gives some confidence, if it does pass, and it's 15, if I understand the applicant correctly, he's not gonna make it worse. That's what I see the opportunity here for, and that's why,
Right.
we talked earlier about this,
Yeah.
Mr. Gromer, and that's what I didn't want conveyed to staff, is that, now we add salt into the wound for Chief Azales, like, yeah, not only did we pass the due pass, now he gets an extra % on top of that, and I don't think that's going
Right.
the right direction here.
No, you're right. And again, as we've worked throughout the month trying to get this they made the modification. They can always come back later if for some reason, once they get into the design, and ask for a variance later if they need to. So there's really no reason for this, since they've actually shown a cross-section that meets the intent of the ordinance.
Variance stays with us. Correct?
That's correct. It stays with you. It does not go on to city
Yeah,
council.
I don't think we would want to do that to Chief, and I think the applicant is okay with that as well, too. Let the cards fall at City Hall where they may, and see what that is, but, just gives him some assurance that you're not gonna make the situation I would say worse, any more steep than it is.
All right, well, Mr. Dale, we appreciate you, and, well, actually, a point of clarification, this may be a typo on our agenda. It shows the city of Maumelle as the applicant. Is that correct, or?
So, this variance was recommended by the city attorney. So it really is the applicant that's moving, only because she wanted to make sure that we did not allow a 2% variance on a residential street, that we allowed only a 1%. So we moved it forward as staff.
And I'm sure Mr. Dale and White Daters will do their best to see if they can come up with something perhaps better if they can, and between now and it goes before the council.
All right, and being hyper-technical here, Mr. Grummer, in light of Mr. Dale's comments about the developer wishing to withdraw this, would the city of Maumelle wish to withdraw this?
Yes, city of Maumelle wishes to withdraw the variance.
Thank you, Mr. Dale, and thank you, Mr. Grummer.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item number 3, regarding the regarding 1120 code, and a bit of explanation to this is this was initially slotted as a variance request, but you can blame me for complicating this a little bit. In some exchanges I had with the city attorney, she and I had discussed some of the issues that were brought up at subcommittee, being whether or not this is actually a structure which would not be allowed within the setback or within the easement, in which case, and my position being that if this may be allowed by code, it may not be appropriate to have a variance if nothing was done wrong. So, Madam City Attorney found this section of code to where this is effectively an appeal of the denial of the permit to build, or the permit to have the above-ground pool in the location that it is. Mr. Grummer, staff comments?
So you've pretty much stated it out in full. So this was an applicant who installed an above-ground pool. After the fact, the city found out and requested that he provide a permit. The permit was submitted to the city, and the permit was denied because the pool sits over the required setback easement, which is 10 feet. It's about 4 feet over. The challenge with our ordinance is determining what's a structure and what's a use. This is considered a use. And by the way that we do our permitting process, it still does not meet the guidelines because it's over the setback. But in discussions with the city attorney and the comments that she's provided, the actual use could be considered easily movable, which is similar to other things that can be placed in a setback and an easement if it can be easily removed if needed. Being an above-ground pool, it does not have the construction as an in-ground pool, which cannot be moved. So staff recommend, well, being an appeal, I have to leave it up to the commission as to our recommendation from the permit standpoint was to deny it based on the use, and it's over the setback. So staff recommends not denial of the, based on our previous.
Mr. Chair, was the above-ground pool permitted as an accessory use or an accessory structure?
Looking at the application, it would have been permitted as an accessory use. As you can see in your packet, there is a specific swimming pool application, which per the code, an accessory use, which includes pools. I believe it also includes flower and vegetable gardens, a few other things that may or may not be involve structures. They do require a permit, but from my review of the code, there's little guidance on the permitting requirements for the special uses. We have quite a bit of guidance as far as where structures are allowed and those type of things, but no guidance as to what use, where uses may or may not be, whether they may or may not be in an easement, in a setback, et cetera. And my looking on this, my thoughts on this hinge entirely on whether or not this is a movable item to where it can be considered a structure or not, is the only guidance I can see in the code regarding the location of it being where it is within roughly 8 feet of the property line, within that 10 feet line, is that if it is not a structure, I don't see anything in the code that would not allow it to be there. And if that's the reason that the permit is denied, then I don't know if there is a basis in the code for doing so. I understand it's been, the procedure of the city for, a couple decades or more that, pools and accessory uses, have been subject to this permitting process and not been allowed within the setback lines and within easements. But so if this is an issue with whether or not the denial was proper, it would certainly be, in my opinion, a shortcoming of the code and not necessarily procedure, as the code may not have caught up with permitting procedure.
But if the applicant, Mr. Chairman, had went and applied, he would have found this out, that he couldn't get within so many feet of the property, or in the setback, right?
Presumably, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, regardless if it's an accessory, thank you for your explanation. So regardless if it is an accessory use or an accessory structure, it is not permitted at the current location by code.
That's arguable. The only thing that I've found in the code, and anybody else can, correct me on that, is we have certain things that are, adopted by reference, such as pool code and the other building codes, is that the only thing not allowed, within the setback and the easement is an accessory building or an accessory structure, and the definitions defines those as you know, structure and building being the same, but more importantly being that they have and I'm paraphrasing here, a more or less permanent, foundation or permanent attachment to where they are. So, while it has been practiced for accessory uses not to be allowed, within setback, there may not be, explicit code to support it, but the code is certainly up to interpretation.
I mean, you can put a raised flower bed right there in it.
Possibly not. A flower garden is an accessory use.
So I think one of the things that happens with the appeal is it gives you the ability to make some of those calls where we don't have it specifically literal interpretations within the ordinance where you can say, okay, this may be something that by intent it could be moved or we may need to make some modifications, but it's a by I don't know, it's
And an additional comment on whether or not the commission is willing to set anything that might be considered a precedent is that if the permit denial is allowed to stand, we will move on into a variance, which would, potentially, give credence to the interpretation of the code as it is, but still give the possibility of a variance to the landowner, and not necessarily interpret code differently than it has been.
So I may have said this. So did the code enforcement, the permits write this as a structure or use? And I already asked you that, but you said it wasn't, it's not, in the form that they're filling out, there's not a definition, this is either permitted by use or permitted by structure. Our permit folks are not making that determination.
and we can ask the deputy director to come up and get more specifics on that because he has more experience with the actual permit and how it's written and how it's taken.
Mr. Deputy Director, if you please. And we thank you for coming tonight.
Trent Carter, Deputy Director, Planning Permits, City of Maumelle.
So are you making a discernment between accessory use and accessory structure when you write a permit regarding either function? You may not even been aware that there was a specific
Not at all.
function.
We've, I would think probably back to the early 80s, these forms have been used, and swimming pool is not really cleared up in our ordinances, whether it's in-ground or above ground. We do follow the international plumbing codes for pools and electrical codes for pools and whatnot, but as far as setbacks, there's no criteria in any of that language for pool codes, but like I said, we've used these forms for many years. It says 10 feet and 8 feet, so it's not that we've defined whether it's a structure or a use.
So if he would have come in with a drawing, if the applicant had done that ahead of time, before the pool was constructed, you'd moved him over to get the 10 feet, correct? He probably wouldn't have a problem with that.
If they'd have came before and got a permit on a regular basis like everybody else typically does, we would have told them it's gotta go here, 10 feet, 8 feet. I still would have denied it based on our previous things to do with whether it's in-ground or above ground. It doesn't matter.
Mr. Gershner's telling you tonight that you really have some liberty there.
Again, like I
That's for
said,
interpretation.
we're just following along what we've done for
Interpretation,
40
so you have some
years.
interpretation of either way, and
Yeah.
that's probably not a good place for a permitting officer to be quite honest
Yeah.
with you. And the
Thank you
reality-
for the comment. Thank you.
I wouldn't want it. Practice raising your right hand, that's no good either.
Is that all?
Thank you, Trent, appreciate it.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments?
And a vote and a no is meaning we're gonna interpret this as a structure. A vote and a yes means that we're interpreting it as a use.
well, I don't necessarily think we have to go that far unless we want to keep speaking about this and making a record, but effectively, a motion in the affirmative to reverse the decision to deny the permit is in order. So therefore, a vote to reverse
Is a yes.
means this effectively the permit is approved, and a vote no basically affirms the denial of the permit.
Yeah, no is agreeing with our permit officer.
A
A
vote
yes
no
is
agrees-
disagreeing with.
Correct.
Thank you. I always get that confused, need to ask every time, sorry for the.
And we do have the applicant here in case anyone has any questions. We'll entertain a motion. Nobody?
I'll make a motion to reverse the decision of the zoning enforcement officer concerning section 94-551 for 11 Shawnee Cove.
I have a motion, do I have a second?
I
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second, any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, yes? Yes. Those opposed, no?
No.
A vote of 5 to 2, the motion fails and the permit denial is affirmed. We will move on to item number 4, which is the request for the variance to effectively allow the pool to stay where it is. Same applicant, Mr. Grummer, any further comments from staff?
So again, if the previous one failed, this is the variance to allow for the structure to be over the setback. So no further comments.
Any commissioners have any questions or comments to staff or to the applicant who is present?
Yeah, I got a question for the applicant. If they're represented.
Yes. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Sam Irvin, 11 Sewanee Cove.
Thank you for attending, Mr. Irvin. At the subcommittee meeting, I asked if you had the opportunity or you reviewed the contract that was between you and the contractor regarding the pool.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any language in there regarding permit? I'm just curious to what it said.
I didn't see anything in there. It just had the stuff, specific things about where it was set, 15 feet from electrical lines, 10 feet from trees,
Who did you say the
10 feet
contractor
from
was?
utilities. Family Leisure is who I bought the pool from. I don't know who installed it necessarily. Somebody who
Or
they
their
had.
sub or something to that effect?
Yeah.
So wasn't anything in there saying that the permitting responsibility was the owner's responsibility?
I didn't see find anything in there.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the commission? I will entertain a motion. Anyone want to make a motion?
Okay, make a motion to grant the various request for 94-551C at 11 Swanee Cove.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, yes? Yes. Those opposed, no?
No.
By a vote of 5 to 2, the variance is denied. We'll move on to item number 5, a proposed motion for a due pass recommendation to City Council.
Nope, we gotta get out of that BZA.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Todd. We'll now close the meeting of the Board of Zoning Adjustment and reconvene the meeting of the Maumelle Planning Commission. Now moving on to item number 5. Thank you again, Commissioner Todd. The proposed motion for a due pass recommendation to City Council for a proposed ordinance to amend section 54-131 of the Master Drainage Facility Plan. Mr. Grummer, staff comments?
So this ordinance is being brought forth from the mayor's office, and so he may want to describe this one in more detail. But as you all know, this year we've been dealing with more rainstorm events and intensities that have been impacting a lot of residential areas. We've been evaluating that and looking into, so one of the things the mayor has tasked us with is to look into the master drainage facility plan and determine what we need to do to begin improving our drainage system. So one of the things that were recommended in discussions with other engineering firms and looking at other cities, they're taking residential street designs from 10-year to a 25-year storm event when it comes to the drainage facilities. So the recommendation on this ordinance is to upgrade the standard category 4, which is a ditch, 5 drain, and 6 swell facilities, from a 10-year to a 25-year storm event in order to accommodate the more intensity heavy storms. One of the things that I did in the research, as well as looking into it, our plan needs more review. It needs more, and this is just probably one of many that's going to be coming down the line. But Fayetteville has a great drainage criteria manual that gets into specifics on other things that probably could be modified into ours. But with that, I would leave it further explanation from the mayor as needed.
Thank you. Mayor Norris, 550 Edgewood is my address. The ordinance is pretty self-explanatory. I know Commissioner Johnson brought up a good issue about maybe there's more we could do. We've talked with Scott and with the city engineer. And I think that a more comprehensive approach is the best approach. Over the last, say, 6 to 8 years being involved with the city, I have found that sometimes things get tabled to wait until you have greatness or the best version of it. And I think this is a good and an improvement. I don't know that it fully solves it. So rather than wait until we have time to do a comprehensive approach, my personal position is make a change for the good, even if it's not the best. We can always come back later and do something. But in the meantime, subdivisions that are going in, residential subdivisions that are going in, with the, designing for the 10-year flood would be better suited if they were designing for a 25-year event. And so that's the gist of my position, why we're pushing it forward, while recognizing that really a more comprehensive approach is also probably preferred in the long run.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions for the mayor? Anyone else?
Thank you, Mayor.
Any additional commissioner questions or comments? I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the proposed motion for due pass recommendation, City Council, for the modifications on the design standard categories 4, 5, and 6 for 10-year to 25-year storm event, pending any other commission or staff comments.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes? Yes. Those opposed, no. All right. The motion carries. We will now close the public hearing and move on to council liaison reports. September 8th, Commissioner Fisher?
Yes, September 8th, there were 2 items of interest for the planning commission. The first one was a pass of the conditional use for the child daycare center that we had talked about before. And the second one was a resolution granting a conditional permit for the splash pad. And I might add that our Commissioner Johnson did an admirable job of making a presentation.
Obviously not.
To the city board, even though they didn't pay attention to it.
I don't think, Chairman Gersher said I didn't come strong enough, so I'll do better next time. I'll try.
I also might add, you got a couple comments on the Facebook Live
Oh,
while
I
you were
did,
speaking.
I missed those, I missed those.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Moving on to this week's meeting was mine. There were no items of interest to the Planning Commission. Moving on to, says liaisons for October. October 5th is Commissioner Ramsey, and October 19th is Vice Chairman Todd. Anything else?
Make a motion we adjourn.
Second. Motion and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no. We're adjourned.
Champ. Was reading some of your